Agatha Christie, often called the Queen of Crime, is one of the most celebrated and prolific writers in history, known for her detective novels and short stories. Here's an overview of her life, works, and impact. Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller was born on September 15, 1890, in Torquay, Devon, England, to a wealthy upper-middle-class family. Her father, Frederick Alva Miller, was American, and her mother, Clara Beamer, was British. Christie was homeschooled by her mother, who encouraged her to read and write. She did not have formal schooling but developed an early love for storytelling. She began writing poems and short stories in her teens, many of which were rejected by publishers. During World War I, Christie worked as a nurse and later as a pharmacy dispenser, gaining knowledge of poisons, a recurring element in her novels. Christie married Archibald Christie, a World War I pilot, in 1914. The couple had a daughter, Rosalind Hicks, in 1919. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1928 following Archibald's affair. Shortly after her mother's death and her husband's infidelity, Christie disappeared for 11 days. Found staying at a hotel under an assumed name, she claimed amnesia. This mysterious event remains a topic of debate among biographers. In 1930, Christie married Max Mallowan, a distinguished archaeologist. She frequently accompanied him on excavations in the Middle East, which inspired several novels, including Murder in Mesopotamia. Her travels with Max Mallowan provided exotic settings and historical contexts for many of her stories, such as Death on the Nile and Appointment with Death. Personal challenges, like her divorce and public scrutiny, influenced her exploration of psychological depth and human motives in her characters. Christie wrote 66 detective novels, 14 short story collections, and 6 romance novels under the pseudonym Mary Westmacott. She is most famous for creating 2 iconic characters. Hercule Poirot, a meticulous Belgian detective, featured in 33 novels. Miss Marple, an observant spinster detective, featured in 12 novels. Christie's mysteries are known for their clever plotting, red herrings, and surprise endings. She often set her stories in confined spaces, such as trains, islands, or English villages. Common themes include justice, morality, and human psychology. By the 1950s, Christie had become a household name, celebrated for her mysteries. She was highly private, rarely giving interviews. In 1971, she was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire for her contributions to literature. Christie passed away on January 12, 1976, at the age of 85 in Wallingford, Oxfordshire. She was buried at St Mary's Churchyard in Chelsea. Christie is recognized as the best-selling novelist of all time, with over 2 billion copies of her books sold. Her works have been translated into over 100 languages, making her one of the most translated authors. Here are some of her best-selling and most famous works. And Then There Were None, 1939. Sales, over 100 million copies. Plot: 10 strangers are invited to an island under different pretexts, but one by one, they are murdered. This psychological thriller is considered one of Christie's finest works, and it remains her best-selling novel. Murder on the Orient Express, 1934. Sales, over 50 million copies. Plot: Hercule Poirot investigates a murder aboard the famous train, the Orient Express, where all the passengers seem to have a connection to the victim. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, 1926. Sales, over 40 million copies. Plot: This groundbreaking novel introduced a surprising twist ending, which was controversial at the time but later hailed as one of Christie's most clever works. Poirot's investigative journey uncovers secrets in a small English village. Death on the Nile, 1937. Sales, over 40 million copies. Plot: Hercule Poirot investigates the murder of a wealthy heiress aboard a luxurious steamer on the Nile River. It's a complex tale of love, betrayal, and revenge. The ABC Murders, 1936. Sales, over 30 million copies. Plot: Poirot is challenged by a serial killer who seems to be following an alphabetical pattern in his murders. It's one of Christie's most popular Poirot novels. 5 Little Pigs, 1942. Sales, over 30 million copies. Plot: Poirot is called to solve a 16-year-old murder. The only evidence is the testimony of 5 witnesses, each with a different version of events. The Secret Adversary, 1922. Sales, over 25 million copies. Plot: the first book to feature the duo of Tommy and Tuppence, it's a fast-paced spy thriller about a missing millionaire and a valuable secret. The Body in the Library, 1942. Sales, over 25 million copies. Plot: Miss Marple solves the mystery of a young woman's body found in the library of a respectable family. It's a classic Miss Marple story of small-town intrigue and deception. A Murder is Announced, 1950. Sales, over 20 million copies. Plot: a local newspaper announces that a murder will occur at a specific time in a village, and when it happens, Miss Marple is called to investigate. Hercule Poirot's Christmas, 1938. Sales, over 20 million copies. Plot: Poirot is called to solve a Christmas family mystery involving a family patriarch, a murder, and a complex web of relationships. Agatha Christie's works have been adapted into numerous films, television series, and plays. Here's a list of notable movie adaptations of her books. Murder on the Orient Express, 1974, 2017. The 1974 version starred Albert Finney as Poirot. The 2017 version was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who also played Poirot. Death on the Nile, 1978, 2022. The 1978 version featured Peter Ustinov as Poirot. The 2022 version was directed by and starred Kenneth Branagh. Evil Under the Sun, 1982. Peter Ustinov reprised his role as Poirot. Appointment with Death, 1988. Another adaptation starring Peter Ustinov as Poirot. A Haunting in Venice, 2023. A loose adaptation of Halloween Party, with Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. Murder, She Said, 1961. Based on 4.50 from Paddington, starring Margaret Rutherford as Miss Marple. Murder at the Gallop, 1963. Based on After the Funeral. Murder Most Foul, 1964. Loosely based on Mrs. McGinty's Dead. Murder Ahoy, 1964. An original story featuring Margaret Rutherford as Miss Marple, and Then There Were None, 1945, 2015. The 1945 adaptation is considered a classic, directed by René Clair. A darker, modernized 2015 BBC miniseries also gained acclaim. The Witness for the Prosecution, 1957, 2016. The 1957 version, directed by Billy Wilder, is a courtroom drama classic. A 2016 BBC adaptation provided a grittier take on the story. The Pale Horse, 1960, 2020. Adapted multiple times, including a 2020 BBC miniseries. Crooked House, 2017. A standalone adaptation featuring an ensemble cast, including Glenn Close. Ordeal by Innocence, 1985, 2018. Adapted into a 1985 film and a 2018 BBC miniseries with significant plot changes. The Mirror Cracked, 1980. Based on The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, starring Angela Lansbury as Miss Marple. Endless Night, 1972. A psychological thriller adaptation of one of Christie's darker novels. 10 Little Indians, 1965, 1974, 1989. Multiple adaptations of And Then There Were None. Hercule Poirot TV series. Agatha Christie's Poirot, 1989 to 2013. Starring David Suchet as Hercule Poirot. Description: this long-running series is one of the most beloved adaptations, with David Suchet portraying the Belgian detective for over 25 years. The series covers all 33 Poirot novels and a number of short stories. The ABC Murders, 2018. Starring John Malkovich as Hercule Poirot. Description: a darker, more recent adaptation of the ABC Murders, with John Malkovich taking on the role of the famous detective. This series is a more modern and gritty interpretation of the classic Miss Marple TV series. Miss Marple, BBC series, 1984 to 1992. Starring Joan Hickson as Miss Marple. Description: Joan Hickson is often regarded as the definitive Miss Marple, bringing a sense of gentleness and sharpness to the character. This BBC adaptation covered 12 of the 13 Miss Marple novels. Agatha Christie's Marple, 2004-2013. Starring Geraldine McEwen, 2004-2009 and Julia Mackenzie, 2009-2013. Description: This series offers a more modern take on the Miss Marple stories, featuring 2 actresses in the titular role. It aired on ITV and took liberties in adapting many of the novels.